What is sense making? In short, it's making sense of the world around us. Good sense making illuminates our thoughts and guides our actions, adding clarity and enrichment to every moment of our lives. So if we can improve our sense making by even a tiny bit, we can greatly improve the quality of our inner world and the quality of our contribution to the world around us. Let's now explore how to improve our sense making through a process called note making. Focused note making sessions are one of the most fun and valuable activities I consistently do with my notes, and yet nobody talks about it because too many people with platforms are steering their audience towards a dangerous path of weak thinking where strong minds go to become soft, highlighting the highlights of their own highlights before regurgitating those highlights in a frustrating loop of passive consumption. Talk about taking the joy out of thinking. There is a better way, but you're going to have to get uncomfortable. You're going to have to make the transition from a note taker into a note maker. And spending more time as a note maker means you are spending more time as a better sense maker. And as a reminder, if we can improve our sense making even a tiny bit, it's going to result in a cascade of positively compounding effects in your personal and even your professional lives. That brings us to this live experiment in active thinking of which you are now a part. That's what this video is here to prepare you for. This video is actually the second half of a recording of a live sense-making session. So in that way, it's more like a Christopher Nolan movie going in reverse to make you pay attention. Or like Mortimer J. Adler might say, we're going to read around the book, reading the table of contents, skimming the chapters before diving into the meat of it. That means you'll actually see the results of Helen and Gary's sense-making sessions first, and then you're going to listen to a Q&A about the session as a whole before you even get into the session itself. Sense-making sessions like these are a crucial part of the Linking Your Thinking workshop. I'm sharing this public version of it because I want to steer the thinking conversation about what matters from highlights to insights. And if that resonates with you, you should definitely consider enrolling in the workshop. But it doesn't matter if you join. What matters most to me is that you break free of being this full-time note taker and that you experience the breakthroughs that come from more time as a note maker. After this video, you will be prepared to enter a focused environment where you can work your note-making muscles in real time with the core part of this recording. So I'm asking you now to lean forward, to get uncomfortable, and to be an active participant in this thinking experiment. So just like Memento, let's begin at the end and hear from Helen and Gary first before going through the Q&A, before inviting you to enter the arena as an active note maker yourself. How was your experience? I'm curious, kind of like Bragat showed us, how did it go for you?
Yeah, so this is not my first sense-making session, but this time around, I really leaned into the uncomfortable. I tried to follow the prompts a bit more. The first time, my mind sort of went in all directions. And this time around, I focused mainly on hug. And the prompt, what did this remind you of? It made me think about a handshake and how it's just a more intimate form of a handshake. And the thing you hear a lot about handshakes is that you can tell a lot about a person from shaking hands with them. And I think that the same applies to hugging somebody. There are some people who, when I think hug, I think them because it's just the most wonderful feeling to be hugged by them. And then there are others where I don't even know that they've hugged me because, it's very awkward and their arms are just hovering in my vicinity. And I thought that was a really cool, some really cool thoughts I had around hugs that I didn't even realize, which I really appreciate about the sense-making sessions. It brings forth a lot of knowledge and opinions that I didn't really realize I had until I'm forced to sit with these things that are familiar and externalize these thoughts that I already have.
That's really profound. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I don't want to cut you off. Is that every
No.
of the big parts?
that was the big takeaway for me, and it's something that even though I have already taken the workshop, it's something I needed to be reminded of,
Hmm.
because I think it is so easy to get caught up with new things all the time and to fall back into that novelty bias, and even providing that space to go into the note making state of mind is something that has to be wrestled with on a continuous basis. Just because I know these things and I've done them before doesn't mean that I don't need to still work at keeping that in my life on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I do think it's use it or lose it a little bit, and it's kind of what I hope you got out of the workshop, among other things, is just that it's an environment like we went through today that forces you to create habits where you are using it, like using the better thinking muscles, and then it becomes, like, after the workshop, transformational, because then everything you look at, you're looking at a little bit differently. But it's easy also to fall back off the wagon or on the wagon. I always forget which one it is. But we just have to keep it up. We have to keep the practice up. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, no problem. I just want to add, going through the workshop, I think does help with coming back to this way of thinking, because my vault is generated around providing things that pull me back into my vault. I think it might have been me actually that said that I don't go to YouTube as much. I don't know, I can't remember who said it, but that
Oh,
sounds
so
like
cool.
something. Yeah, that I do find myself going more towards my vault when I do have free time, and I see all the external sources as something secondary to contribute to the vault instead of the other way around.
Well, thanks for that. I'm curious, Gary and Deirdre, did you want to share? I don't want to put you on the spot or make feel like you have to.
I can quickly share.
Go for it. Please share.
Yeah, I just focused on Frankenstein because nothing wrong with revisiting the other concepts, but it was just the first thing that grabbed me based on some discussions with Helen and Bob, and your mention of mycelium networks throughout the course. So some of the questions, yeah, I kind of started with the prompts, but it's basically a lot of stuff from conversations that just flooded into an idea of what is life. And I think so. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit about some themes on cybernetics, cyborg culture that seem to be emerging. A conversation with you about mycelium networks actually led me to a quote that I quite liked by Donna Haraway that talks about how the smallest unit of life is a relation. And then that got me started thinking, like, what is life? How do these thresholds, what is a thought? How does information and thought interact, or sort of bridges the boundaries of life? Where does that threshold of information and life, when data takes form in life, like maybe like a virus generating instructions in our body and then producing a sort of material reality, and then how information becomes behavior and information becomes culture, and so on and so forth. And then it makes me think a little bit about, like, what is thinking even.
Yeah, that's really cool to see. I mean, Frankenstein, it seems to do that. And that's what I was hoping to do with those examples, is we have something like, Bitcoin, we have Hug. I mean, they're so random, but wanted to have, well, at least one good literature source in there. And that one really makes me think of a lot of things. And you even have like Stuart Brand in there, who's, is a great thinker. It's really cool to see all the different directions that goes. So thanks for sharing. And raise your digital Zoom hand for questions.
How do you find random concepts such as those today?
I'll answer it in two different ways. The first one is, for this exact session, I'm thinking about a good mixture where they're just as random as possible, but that there are some fun angles to go into. And those concepts came from workshop participants. Part of the onboarding process is where they share some underrated concepts that they really enjoy. So then they fuel the conversation, and I kind of just choose the ones that seem like they'll work. Now, like on a practical level, like what you do on a daily basis, is you just stumble across something, like, you're reading a book or somebody says something like this concept, sfumato. What is that? That's pretty cool. I read it in this book on art history. Okay, what is that? So apparently the reason the one idea about the Mona Lisa is it's so interesting because we don't know what she's really thinking. Kind of looks like she's smiling, kind of looks like she's not. How was that accomplished? And I guess there's a technique or a trend, a style, whatever. It's called sfumato, which is kind of like the gray areas. I'm not doing it justice. I like that term. I came across it and I was busy at the time, so I did not externalize it into a note. Then it came up in a conversation that I mentioned this thing to somebody else. I was like, wow, this really means something to me. Let me like throw it into a note and then really start to link it to these things that it reminds me of. And then you can start building this personal custom meaning through that process. So I hope that answers your question.
This is my first time I use a sense-making Zoom session. Is this a thing?
Well, it is now. We've done these for the Linking Your Thinking workshop, and it's my favorite activity, as I'll say. No one else, as I'm aware of, is doing things like this. Obviously, you can see where it's rough around the edges with technology, but we're able to do quite a bit. We're able to create an environment that forces you, draws you into it, and forces you to think for yourself and not passively consume. So how are we doing that? Well, we're doing it through note making. So just kind of like broad umbrella, sense making is what we do every moment of our lives just by living. You know, we can't help ourselves. Note making is a very specific exercise that can help accelerate and improve how we make sense of things. So yeah, we do these during the workshop, and I'll probably, I don't know, maybe sometime next year I'll do another one just publicly, but it's also something people can just do on their own too. There's no reason not to.
How do you find balance between consumption and sense-making sessions?
Everybody, by and large, if I'm going to generalize in today's society, they're consuming too much. So whatever amount you're consuming, do less of it. And then you'll have more space that you can force in for sense making. It takes a little bit more effort to get into this note making stuff. So you have to create the space for it. You have to create the environment, and hopefully, do it enough times where you create the habit. The way I look at it though is it's fun. It's so much fun once you kind of feel comfortable with the tools and the technology. And so then that starts to supplant. Like, I don't really care to look at random articles that Pocket recommended to me. There was a point in my life where I did. I'm past that. Like now I see something out there and it's what I call signal. I'm like, yeah, let me learn more about that. And then I'll figure out ways to have conversations, engage with that material much sooner. And the consumption, there's nothing wrong with highlighting, but when you're highlighting the highlights of the highlights of the highlights, you're doing the wrong work. At some point you have to, and very quickly, you need to transition from this note-taking methodology that too many of us are trapped in into recognizing that you are part of this conversation. So hopefully that gives some perspective on it. We have to do both, but it's just, you need to create the space where you can do your note making, your sense making efforts. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling positive feedback loop that you just want to keep doing it.
Are the question prompts the same with just words being different? Or do you have a bank of more prompt questions?
Definitely have a bank. So this is the warming up session. And then the next one in the workshop is getting opinionated. And then the next one after that's about mapping, kind of like more of a structural one. But yeah, they're all a bank of prompts. We go heavily into prompts. Questions about questions. Those are the things that really get us activated. Then we can take anything. You could look at the wall. There's a lamp. Okay, let's work with lamp. And then you just start connecting it to things. And it's pretty wild how not only fun that is, but how you can end up creating value. Again, value internally and value externally in the conversations and creations that you have. So definitely it's different every time. Although I will say, as I forget who mentioned it, I think it was Gary or Helen or both, but we've worked on a few of these words before. I just couldn't help but reuse kintsugi and hug and future proof, because I just think that those are topically important to bring into the conversation. But yeah, it's always different prompts after the warm-up session. This prompts this time focused on generating new layers of interpretation and associations for each of us personally. It'd be interesting to contrast these evocative prompts with challenge prompts or support prompts that ask for what grounds there are for disagreeing with or providing further evidence, arguments for a statement note. That would be a more public discursive process. Thanks for adding. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Joel. Thanks for sharing that, because yeah, this a good choice of words there. This is quite evocative, where it's trying to really force that thinking, but it doesn't mean that we support it. So even you should feel the freedom to type something that you don't believe in. With Bitcoin, I made a supposition that was kind of a joke. It felt like a comedy routine. I didn't believe in it, but it's starting something, and then I can challenge it and say, well, do I really even think that? And then to Joel's point, you can take it further and actually look a little bit more at the grounds and evidence to see what those arguments stand on.
Do you cover note making of nonfiction books?
So this must be referring to the workshop. Yeah, we do cover in Unit 5 how to process information, and some of that information are books, including nonfiction books. So we do spend some time on that. Again, we don't spend so much time on it because there's kind of an obsession with all that input stuff. And so that's where everyone gets caught and stuck, and they don't move on from that. So that's why instead of making it the first unit, the input stuff is actually the second to last unit. And then that way we can focus on our own processes first, our own thinking. And then by the time our own personal knowledge management customized system. So by the time we get to Unit 5, now we kind of understand what is signal to us versus what is the noise. But yeah, then we do have some basic workflows for how to process things like nonfiction books.
I'm not familiar with Obsidian tools. Do you also cover that?
Oh yeah, and we do. It's not the Linking Your Thinking workshop is not a course on Obsidian, but I think you can't help but kind of through osmosis pick up a lot through all the conversations. Oops, I'm gonna have to switch my camera. I think a lot of the conversations and all that, you can't help but start to learn about the process. So yeah.
How do students use the sense making in writing their thesis paper?
Well, I think that would tie into, academic and research sense making. A good place to start is definitely Zonka Aren's book, How to Take Smart Notes, just to consider the bottom-up process of accumulating information that you can then make sense of. I do think the one thing that you'll want to add to the process is considering where bottom-up, grabbing notes randomly, making new notes, connects to the top-down, structuring information in such a way that when it comes time to write that PhD dissertation, whatever it might be, master's thesis, that you have both all the ingredients and kind of a structure in place to manage these ingredients. So then you can start outputting something that we call middle out, using things like maps of content to structure those notes. A lot of gobbledygook there, but I hope something there makes sense. Jose, you had your digital hand raised?
As a student, how can we balance between taking notes in homeworks and stuff like that and taking the value to our vault for long-term knowledge management?
I worked on this process after my formal education, so keep that in mind with my answer and just use it as one dot on a map of dots that you have to decide for yourself. But I would say this: you have a curriculum, and that curriculum has a syllabus. It has a pre-built structure, and from that structure, you can put aspects of it into your note-making software of choice. That structure will look a lot like a book's table of contents. And so now when you start working with the material, you already have a scaffolding, so to speak, something that stuff can stick to. And all you have to do is make connection. Algebra, let's imagine it's algebra. The algebra curriculum is pretty understood at this point. There are different ways to teach algebra, of course, but you can understand when you're going to cover, variables, x, and all these different things. And so if you use a pre-made map that has stood the test of time, it's been vetted over the course of as long as we've had algebra as a formalized form of education, then you can be pretty confident as you're having ideas, as you're reaching this material, you can kind of link or add notes, and this table of contents will start to morph into a map of content, which means that it's more customized to you. You're gathering information, you're developing it within an existing framework. So then you have it. Now, okay, this does take more time than the churn and burn approach where you're just trying to pass that course or whatever. But when you do it this way, you don't only have that note. This is like the note. I don't know why this is my symbol for note, but this is your big map of content, table of contents for algebra. But now you can start on the fly while you're taking this course, link it to those other notes that you make in your life. You're walking by the field one day and you say, well, why is a tree at this angle? And then you think, well, I can actually measure how high it is if I know this angle and the distance. So all of a sudden, using this, well, it's more like geometry, but you can connect it to another note in your note-making personal note library. And so all of that stuff is going to create a fuller experience of you learning this material. So it supports and compounds in value. And it's not just a churn and burn, get a passing grade, move on to the next one. Kind of hard to answer on the fly, but hopefully that gives you something to chew on.
Are there any plugins you'd recommend to make the sense-making session much better?
Yeah, totally. Well, the thing is, so if you are using Obsidian, you don't have to really use any of the community plugins to make this work. There are only 4 that I would recommend. And out of those 4, there's only one. And out of that one, you don't have to use it. So what are the 4? First one is sliding panes. Well, here, if I show my screen, it's a little bit more helpful. So so for the plugins, like this was our session, I'll make it a little bit smaller if I can. Okay, I could put Bitcoin in a new window, fluid thinking, novelty bias. Okay, so sliding panes means that if I hold down shift and then I scroll with my mouse wheel, I can kind of go to left to right to mimic index cards. So for me, I love it. You might not. So that's one community plugin that I use. The other one that I absolutely love is called Note Refactor. I think that's the most important for note making and for sense making times, because a good example would be today's session. I wrote this big long thing on Frankenstein, and let's not use that one. Let's say I want to just make these sense-making takeaways their own note. So what Note Refactor does is I just made it its own note, and it links back to the note I was working on. It's like, whoa, this is so powerful. And, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it'll be second nature. It'll be like hitting A on the keyboard. But for right now, it's mind blowing. This is how it should work when we work with text, like their ideas, and we can just move them around. So that's pretty cool. However, Note Refactor is not needed as much because there is a core plugin called Note Composer that you should also get to know. And a good way to use that would be on Frankenstein here, where I'm going to select this text specifically, and using the core plugin, I'm going to hit Note Composer. And I actually have a note on Frankenstein. I don't even remember what's in it, but I'm going to merge. This isn't a tutorial on Obsidian, but if I did merge it, let's look at the Frankenstein note. Oh, okay. See, that's Note Composer I'm a little new with, but what it did is it actually pulled in the entire sense session in here. So not exactly what I wanted, but the point is we want to be able to shift around text. So there's sliding panes, and then there's Note Refactor that are community plugins I definitely recommend. You don't have to use either of those. The other one that I find really helpful is Tag Wrangler, which allows me to really quickly go to my tags, which you can nest in Obsidian, pretty powerful. Let's say I want to change this book tag, which you can see right here in the Frankenstein note. I can just rename it here to gobbledygook, and it's renaming that note in every single note. So then when I open it up in the search sidebar, let me collapse so it's a little bit cleaner. And let's go to the random note, like on the Almagist. Let me just move some of the, make it a little bit wider for you. You can see that in the tags, it's updated. Now, obviously, we don't want to do that. So Tag Wrangler allows you to quickly manipulate your tags like you should be able to. I mean, again, this is one of those things that should just be second nature. Eventually, I am confident it will be some sort of core plugin that Obsidian offers, along with all the software to come. Like you just have to be able to do that stuff in today's day and age. And the fourth one, I'm blanking, but I have recommended plugins. So the calendar app. So if you like the calendar mode, if you like daily notes, then you can go ahead and have a calendar. So those are the recommended plugins. I'm getting a lot of, I like my reason for doing all this is to meet really fascinating people and to think with them and just to have fun thinking and improving how we do thinking and all that. That being said, everybody's asking about Obsidian specific courses. So before the end of the year, I'm going to create my very opinionated Obsidian course for thinkers, fiddlers, and noodlers. So that should be fun. And it will cover this sort of thing.
How do you handle security concerns when using community plugins? Do you check the GitHub repos of the plugins?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. And what is handling community plugin security? So essentially, the way Obsidian works is anybody can create a plugin, and then you might download it, but that plugin's not safe because they have something hidden in the code. So there are a few factors that prevent against that. For one, the two developers look at every plugin. It goes through a review session before it's approved. They are pretty good. They're pretty good at what they do. That's the first line of protection. The second is the community itself. If there are 0 downloads somehow, and you happen to beat everybody to it, don't download it. Wait for the people who are the very early adopters to try it out. And so it becomes community proof as another forum. So yeah, you can check out the GitHub, but the Obsidian Discord forum is really where you can ask these questions about, hey, what are people's experience with this plugin? Does everyone feel like it's safe? And then you'll hear opinionated responses. And if it's out there, it's going to be safe. That's how I feel. But you have to have your own privacy policy and safety policy with different plugins.
Do you use prompts in your note-making process?
Well, the prompts are training wheels, and they're also Kickstarters. After you are used to the process, you no longer have to read the manual to just get going. So sometimes you need a kick in the butt, though. And so let's go back to the prompts, or you need to overcome the big wall in front of you. So, hey, let's go back to the prompts and just kind of get a boost or help to go around it. But yeah, for the most part, it's about getting repetitions with these prompts. So then it becomes second nature to think that way. I'm all about repetitions. And that's why from my opinion, the workshop is so valuable to a lot of people, because it's not, here's how you create, use these 3 folders, use these 5 folders. It's a holistic and sustainable way to get people thinking better in a sustainable long-term way. And that's super valuable as far as I'm concerned. And I think important for a healthy society. This is only the opening conversation around sense-making through note-making. Sense-making through note-making is so vitally important that I want to share with you the hands-on interactive session where you are actually put in a focused environment to work out these most valuable muscles. Are you ready to lean forward and actually go through the note-making process? If so, click the link below so you can learn the details of the exercise, get the instructions, and most importantly, enter a focused environment on the internet where you can work those note-making muscles without a bunch of distractions. Because for this to work, you have to do the work. I'll see you on the other side.